right, cool. Hi guys. So we'll get started. We have a pretty good amount of people right now, but I'm sure people will be able to join later on. So we'll just get started because I don't want to keep you guys waiting. Hi guys, my name is Iman, and I am the Executive Director for Global Youth for UNICEF. Super nice to have you guys here for the second episode of our webinar series. We are here with someone really special and who's done amazing work in the field of global sustainability. And I will definitely let him introduce himself after giving you guys a little quick introduction to who we are and why we're doing this. Global Youth for UNICEF is an informal international network of high school and undergrad college students who want to support UNICEF in their field of fighting for children's rights and equality. And considering the fact that we're currently stuck in a pandemic, our team really thought of ideas of how to engage a lot of us who haven't had the opportunity to continue challenging ourselves as intellectual leaders. And a lot of the topics we're covering in this series are things that we don't get taught in the normal standard school curriculum. So we hope that this opportunity will give you guys the ability to really understand really urgent issues from people who are actually working in them and have the experience to speak about it. But yeah, that's pretty much what the series is. And also I'll give you guys more information at the end, but I will be plugging in information about our network. So if you want to join us or apply as an executive member, you can definitely do so. And I just typed it into the chat. So feel free to look into us more and see if you want to apply to join our team. And now we'll start getting to the good stuff. So our schedule is basically going to be, as I'm doing right now, is the introduction. And then I'm going to pass the microphone over to Mr. Shahyd, and he's going to talk to us in kind of an open-ended question way. I have some questions selected from you guys that you sent, and also some questions our team brainstormed. If you have any questions that come up during the session, feel free to type it into the Q&A box below your screen. You'll see that there's a Q&A section, and then type any question and our moderators will approve it accordingly. We hope to get to everyone's questions, but since we have limited time, we'll be selecting things that really give new insight to the conversation and haven't been repeated or anything like that. And at the end, we'll open it up to major questions that you guys have, and that section will be dedicated to answering your questions specifically in the last 10 to 15 minutes. So that's the schedule for us. And without further ado, I'd like to hand the mic over to Mr. Shahyd. He works for the NRDC, which is the National Resource Defense Council, and they've done amazing work, and we're so excited to have him on board. So I'll let him introduce himself.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Again, my name is Khalil Shahyd, and I'm a senior policy advocate with the Natural. It's not national. We are actually an international organization. Our press team drills that in us all the time because sometimes people confuse it. I want us to let people know that we are an international organization. So it's the Natural Resources Defense Council. I'm based out of our office in Washington, D.C., which we have 5 major offices across the U.S. In New York is our headquarters. We also have offices in Chicago, in San Francisco, and Santa Monica, California, with smaller satellite offices in Montana and Denver. We are also, like I said, international presence. We have an office in Beijing, China, and are soon opening an office in New Delhi, India, as well as projects really across Latin America. So we are a fairly large organization internally, and then we're also, to some degree, you can say a member-based organization because we have about 3 million online members and activists who contribute to our work every year. In addition to the 700 plus, climate scientists, lawyers, policy specialists, community planners, geographers, and health scientists who work with me across all of NRDC's offices. And I would say we are somewhat unique, particularly for American environmental organizations, because most environmental groups here in the U.S., particularly the big greens, as we sort of call ourselves, the big environmental organizations, typically, many of the more more scientific or policy-based organizations typically specialize in one area. You might see them specializing more in the conservation lens of the environmental movement. So thinking about like, wildlife issues, nature issues, those types of environmental organizations, or you may see more of the quote unquote natural resource or energy environmental organizations, which is in our name, which is how we began as a bunch of lawyers in the 70s who wanted to defend the environment from exploitation from industry. But over time, like, as I mentioned, we're over 700 staff members across all these offices. And so, we have energy-based environmental advocacy, we have nature-based environmental advocacy, we have an environmental justice program, we have a community program. So we have a very diverse range of environmental advocacy and expertise under one roof, which makes us a little bit unique, again, for a U.S. environmental organization, in addition to our international work, which we work both at the country level, but are also a member observer at the UN, particularly around the IPCC and the current Paris Agreement. We're very much a part of that negotiation process. So should I stop there, or I know that you sent questions. I don't know how you want to run through those questions.
Yeah, I'll just
very
ask
good questions.
as the conversation goes. They're just meant to kind of guide us, so we have sort of flow. But yeah, you're good. Thank you so much. And I apologize for the slip of the tongue. Yes, the National Resource Defense Council.
That's all right. That's all right. Everyone does it.
And okay, so I'll start with the next question that I have here. So how did you get involved with the organization, and could you tell us a little bit more about the projects you've done and any projects that are, I guess, upcoming?
Sure. Yeah. So I actually came to I guess you can say, an environmental consciousness and, environmental work sort of fairly late. So I started off, I'm from New Orleans, Louisiana. New Orleans, we have a great deal of issues. There's a lot of wealth and racial inequality. It's a very poor city. It's a tourism-based economy, which doesn't provide a great deal of livelihood for a great number, many people. So it's while it's a cultural place, people love it. You have fun there. It's carnival and music and food. There is a lot of poverty and a lot of inequality in the city. And so I grew up and from high school, really began organizing politically in high school, and then into undergrad, but mostly around social justice issues, racial justice issues. And so I really came to the environmental conversation fairly late. And my first sort of experience with it, I would say, was in undergrad. I worked with a group called Estación Libre, and we visited Zapatista communities in southern Mexico, where indigenous communities were in rebellion against the Mexican government over international trade laws that were going to be privatizing their communal lands. And so we went there to provide solidarity and support, but also to do human rights monitoring. And so that was really my first sort of introduction to land-based struggles and to understand the relationship between natural resources and social justice movements. And so came back to the US and did similar work here with rural communities, rural farmers, small farmers in the US that were struggling against some of these same trade issues, not having access to markets, et cetera, here in the US, struggling against US agricultural subsidies for big agribusiness foundations, and just begin to read and begin to understand more and more this connection. But I think it really sort of hit home for me in two ways. It really hit home. But first, I went to graduate school at Brandeis University at the Heller School for Social Policy and Management, and got a master's in sustainable international development. And the second year, and so it's a 2-year program, and the second year is a fieldwork program. And so I spent a year in India. And I was based in New Delhi with a UNDP, but got to travel around a lot. And again, I was really seeing, particularly I spent 3 weeks with a advocacy community in southern India in the state of Karnataka. And Bangalore, many of you may know, is like the IT capital of India. And there was a big construction boom in Bangalore. And one of the issues that this community was having was that their topsoil was being stripped from their farmland to feed the construction industry in Bangalore. And so again, I'm seeing this relationship between natural resources, ecology, environment, and inequality. And at the same time, while I was in India, Hurricane Katrina hit the southern U.S. And flooded New Orleans, and so my home, everything was destroyed. And so I really felt like in that moment, I was in India watching, my home, my city be flooded, and just felt homeless. I had no place in the world to go. Even though I still had this whole country to live in, I just, no other place in this country felt like home to me. And so I felt like I had no place else to go. And so, but it really, the climate question, the environmental question, like really hit home, both in an intellectual way and in a solidarity way with the advocacy community, but then also very personally when Hurricane Katrina hit. And then at that moment, I decided to go back to school, get a PhD in environmental policy to have a much better understanding of these issues, and eventually led me to NRDC, where, as you mentioned, the primary project that I work on is called Energy Efficiency for All. And so basically what this project does, it's similar to the UN Sustainable Development Goal 7 on energy, sustainable energy for all. And so this project, so basically we have a situation in the US where you have a lot of low income families. They pay their utility bills for electricity, for gas, to heat their homes, to light their homes. They pay their bills just like everyone else. And most utilities in most states across the US are required to pay a certain proportion of their revenue back to customers in energy efficiency services to make their homes more energy efficient, so that they use less energy. But what tends to happen here is, because low-income families, they can't afford a brand new construction shiny apartment or shiny home, so they usually occupy older home. It's outdated. It hasn't been maintained very well, and so it leaks a lot of energy. And so they end up paying more per square foot for energy than higher income families. And because it costs more to weatherize and to retrofit their homes, utilities will say, well, look, it costs too much for us to retrofit this home because we're not going to get the type of energy savings that we can get. And so low-income families end up subsidizing energy services for upper income and middle income families. And so the utilities aren't investing back into these homes, and so their utility costs are higher. They end up having their services cut, a lot more often. And so this project I've been working on for about 6 years, and over 6 years, we've raised more than $500 million from utilities and from other sources to provide energy services and retrofits to low-income families across the U.S. But then, we also do a ton of other projects, again, both nationally, internationally. We're doing a project working with, again, low-income communities in the U.S. to create more green space and access to parks in these communities, because there's an issue with lack of trees, lack of parks, lack of green space in these communities, which creates an urban heat island effect. And so particularly in the summer times, there's a lot of heat-related exhaustion and death in these communities because of the disparities in green spaces.
Awesome. Yeah, that's really interesting. I didn't know that you since you experienced it firsthand. That's really cool that it motivated you to get into it. That's really cool. Okay, so my next question is something that a lot of students asked about, and I think it's something that even I myself get confused about sometimes. So the question is, could you talk to us a little bit about global warming versus climate change? Because these tend to be terms that people get really confused about, and it's hard to which one's which, and why is this one climate change and one global warming?
Sure. So first of all, why you hear now today, you're more likely to hear the term climate change rather than global warming. And that's really, it's really a communication strategy, because I think it's really attempting to communicate how we will experience global warming, if that makes sense. Because when you say global warming, it sounds too abstract. And if you say, hey, we have to stop, the Earth from warming, beyond 1.5 degrees Celsius, people will say, oh, that's not a lot. It doesn't sound like much. And so the difference between global warming and climate change, global warming is the average, global temperature rise. And so, climate scientists around the world are pretty much in agreement that at minimum, we have to try to keep global annual temperature rise, within 1.5 degrees Celsius, which is still a lot. Because just very minute changes in that average temperature can have very drastic effects on climate. But 1.5 degrees is something that they think can still be manageable, but it's still a lot. And so 2 degrees or more, then we're going to be in a very bad situation. And so as the Earth warms, climate change then is really talking about the sort of chaotic variety of climate that will then emerge. We're going to see more extremes, much longer and much deeper heat waves, which we've been experiencing here in this area for the past month. You're going to see, much stronger and much more frequent, storms, hurricanes, typhoons. So that's climate change. So just that very minute change in the average temperature, globally, will create these extreme climate changes, droughts, monsoons, that are going to be much more difficult for us to handle over time.
Awesome, thank you. And okay, our next question is, so yeah, this question is actually something I'm also curious about. So there's often a concern that like sustainability is something which only developed countries can really like go through and enact because of cost. And is this true? And how do we encourage sustainability, I guess, in developing regions to maintain that equity?
Yeah. So this question is complex and ironic, and I've read this one, and I'm so happy that you asked it. So I'm going to try not to talk in circles because there's a lot to this question. So first of all, the way that the question was worded, when you say sustainability is for developed countries, that term, the way that it's termed, sustainability, it implies one, a heavy emphasis on technological development, and a heavy emphasis on economic growth. And so there is an assumption by some people, and even people in my organization, we have this debate, this conversation a lot. There is an assumption by some people that sustainability really means ecological modernization. So modernize the electric grid, modernize buildings, modernize transportation, modernize everything. And so unless you have the capital and the financing to be able to invest in the built environment, that built infrastructure, then you're not going to be able to reach sustainability. So that's why there's an assumption that you need a certain level of wealth in order to reach a certain level of sustainability. But I would say that no, that's not true. That sustainability is really a social issue. It's not a technological issue. It's not a built environment issue. And it's really about how we meet our needs sustainably. And so if you had asked the question and said sustainable development, then that changes the tone and the nature of that question. And the irony of it is that the developed world, particularly in the US, we think that sustainable development doesn't have anything to do with us because we've already, at least in our minds, we've reached a level of development that we don't need sustainable development. And so I've been trying to push my colleagues. And so, for example, my organization, we don't do any work around the sustainable development goals. We don't have any projects related to the sustainable development goals. None of the environmental organizations in the US do any work around the sustainable development goals because they don't think that it applies to us. And so there's this disconnect between the way that we think of ourselves, as a developed country and what these dialogues are. But if you've seen, if you have any understanding of the news, and if you've seen, the way that we've handled the response to the COVID-19 pandemic, you know that we have a great deal of social development left to do in this country. We have a lot of work to do. So many of us are really trying to reintegrate our work, particularly from the environmental community, back into a sustainable development conversation. And when we understand it that way, when we understand the relationship between sustainable development, climate change, and inequality, for example, then it's not enough to say that we need technological development. Sure, we do, but we need it to be done in a way that, one, pulls people out of poverty, that reduces inequality, and makes it possible for people to be able to afford these investments. Because we have the same issues here. When we talk about providing energy services to low-income families, for example, if we retrofitted every home and every apartment in the US to be more energy efficient, we would increase the cost of housing for many poor and low-income families who would not be able to afford it. And so unless we complement that policy with housing policy that will enable us to maintain affordable housing for low-income families, if we don't complement that with policies that also pull people out of poverty, then we can't meet our climate goals. And that's what sustainable development is. And so we have to make the distinction between climate policy as being something that just targets the emissions and said, okay, how can we reduce the emissions, and sustainable development that says, how can we reduce the emissions, but also how can we ensure that people have a quality livelihood from that process.
Definitely, and thank you for clarifying that. Yeah, that's a question not only I had, but a lot of people are wondering.
It's a great question.
Yeah, so thank you so much. All right, so our next question is that basically, considering our age group, or what majority of us who are attending are in high school or beginning undergrad college, it can be difficult to feel that we're making impactful decisions on an individualistic level, in terms of sustainability, because we can't really go to the U.S. House and fight and say something in terms of a policy. So what do you think are some small scale actions we can take in order to reduce, I guess, not only our energy and water usage, but like our wastage overall?
Yeah, sure. I think I struggle with this, because when I was in undergraduate school, we did a lot of youth organizing and youth advocacy, with obviously kids who were younger than us in high school and in middle school. And part of me, first and foremost, wants to say to you, just enjoy your journey. Don't forget to enjoy your youth. That it's great, and it's inspirational, and you absolutely have a voice, you have a right to speak, and you have something very important to say to the world. But it's also, don't let folks shame you into being too serious too early. Enjoy your youth. And if anything, it's the adults who need to be ashamed. So that's first and foremost. And then beyond that, I mean, you guys know sort of the basic things. Recycle. Use energy efficient bulbs. Take public transit. Don't follow the U.S. obsession with SUVs. Small cars are so much better for a whole lot of reasons. Just sort of, minute things like that. But I think, as young people, as students, the most important things that you can do, the most important decisions that you can make are, to study, and what you study, and, the choices that you make for what you want to do and to contribute, in your future. That to me is really the most important thing, because and even as you take these moments and make these opportunities and advocate and push and fight, the big moments for you are yet to come. So always be thinking and looking ahead to that, and just preparing for for your time, for your moment, where you're going to be in this seat speaking to other youth, someday yourself. And so that to me, I think is going to be, the most important thing is just what you study, what you read, and what you are passionate about and pushing for moving forward.
Awesome. And going off of that, I guess is another question that's really similar to what you said. So a lot of students who want to go into this field, we're wondering in terms of, like, let's say we get to college and we're picking majors or fields of study. Is there usually a specific major that's required to work in these types of organizations in terms of sustainability?
Yeah. No, absolutely not. But you will see a preponderance of lawyers, of and we don't have any like real economists in our organization, but environmental economists, but they usually tend to stick to academia and do research, or maybe they're in certain organizations, but not in ours. But yeah, there's just a whole bunch of lawyers, man. But no, but really absolutely not, because, and if I can tell you a quick story. So after Hurricane Katrina, when I went back to New Orleans from India, and I'd learned so much from being in India, because there's just so much, there's just so many brilliant people, organizers, community people, they're just doing so many great things. There's, obviously a lot of challenges and, all these issues, et cetera. But there's so many great things happening there. And so I went back to New Orleans, and our mayor of the city had hired and paid him a whole lot of money, a recovery czar. He was supposed to be like organize the city's recovery. And all these neighborhoods, it's a long story, but all the neighborhoods did their own neighborhood plan, and he culminated this into the city-wide recovery plan. And he presented the plan at a discussion at the University of New Orleans. And when you look at it, I was like, it's like, and I raised my hand and I was like, this looks really beautiful. Like, oh, you changed the streets, you put in a roundabout in this street and you changed the landscaping, and like, yeah, it looks beautiful. But 1/3 of our population was still displaced at that time, maybe even more. And I said, there's nothing in this plan that tells us how we're going to get those people home. And his response to me was that he said, hey, I'm an urban planner. I build streets and sewer systems. What you want is an urban sociologist. And my response to him was, well, you're the recovery czar. Why didn't you hire an urban sociologist to help you with the plan? And I say that to say that, we need people from across all different types of disciplines, all different areas, be it, if you're a lawyer, if you're an engineer, if you're an urban sociologist, even an arrogant urban planner, if that's what you want to be. I myself, I'm partial to geography, because human geography, environmental geography, it just touches so many different spaces. And, the books are really good, like the way that they discuss things, I think it's just really brilliant. And just understanding the relationship between people and space, I think is very important. So I'm partial to geography. So please look that up. But yeah, we need people across disciplines, across all areas, across all sectors. And so, yeah, and so don't think that you have to go into one or another. Follow your passion.
Definitely. Yeah, for sure. And that's really cool because I remember reading that like some fields that you can actually do any major you want, like undergrad. So that's cool that it's similar in environmental sustainability. Yeah. So my next question for you, it kind of goes off, I guess, from your work. So obviously there's a lot of studies and it's really obvious that minority communities in the US, especially like the Black community, are disproportionately exposed to like harmful pollution. So what strategies do people usually take, or like environmentalists or urban planners, to address these, I guess, socioeconomic or racial based impacts?
Mm-hmm. Sure. And yeah, and so we have in the US a like like so many things, we are still a very segregated society, and that is crosses everything. So even our environmental movement is segregated. So we have, the big greens, what some people we used to call the quote unquote mainstream environmental movement, which is the white organizations that sort of grew out of the mainstream environmental movement grew out of a warning, you can say, against the excesses of industrial society. And then and that includes both the natural resources, energy versions of that movement, as well as the conservation and natural and the sort of wilderness versions of that movement. But then you have the environmental justice movement, which grew out of the civil rights struggle, particularly in Black communities, but also in Latino, Latinx communities, Asian communities, West Asian communities, South Asian communities, across the U.S. that were dealing with disproportionate burdens against pollution. And so for years, the mainstream environmental movement really didn't hear and really didn't understand what that environmental justice movement was saying. Even as recently as a year ago, a colleague of mine who wrote a brief about the Green New Deal, here in the U.S., she, was sent a letter by another white colleague who said that, who said that she was threatening progress on climate change because she tried to integrate climate change with racial equity. And she said, and this white colleague said, no, we have to keep these things separate because racial equity is too complex for us to address. But somehow decarbonizing the entire planet's economy is easy, but racial equity was too complex for him to think about. And so we're still in this conversation of trying to get particularly the white environmental movement, the big greens, to really understand, what that is. We have made some small steps. I think like the project that I mentioned, Energy Efficiency for All, is trying to deal with the disparities in energy efficiency services through utilities. We support a lot of EJ work with environmental justice partners. We did a lot of work in Flint, Michigan, where it was uncovered that there was massive amounts of lead poisoning coming in through the city's water system. So we sued. We also work with a lot of affordable housing organizations to make this link between climate and environmental policy with affordable housing policy. So we work very closely with those organizations now. So we are changing, we are growing, we are becoming a more diverse movement, but there's still a long way for us to go. Like I said, the U.S., we sometimes like to present ourselves as the leader in a lot of these spaces, but we really are a laggard. And many times we have to, I have to remind our colleagues that when we talk about equity, racial equity in climate politics, that we're not really saying anything radical. We're trying to bring our discourse more in line with the international discourse and where it's been for decades. Because if you read the Paris Climate Agreement, if you read the latest IPCC report, it says very clearly that we will not reach our climate target unless we address climate change in tandem with addressing inequality. We won't do it. We have to do both together. And even when that report came out, my organization, my colleagues sent out a bunch of blogs and press releases about that report. And we only talked about the emissions. We didn't talk about the inequality. And so I wrote a blog criticizing us for that. And I'll try to share that in the chat so that you all can see that and some of the other things that I've written about that. But so we still have a lot of work to do.
Definitely. That would be so helpful if you could provide us with a link. I think that would be great. And I'm sure a lot of people would be really interested in reading that. But I definitely agree with what you said, that in the sense, it seems that whenever race is brought up and as a subject, it always seems to be too political of a matter, even though it's more of a basic human rights factor. So yeah, definitely. Thank you for answering that. So our next question kind of focuses more on the coronavirus. So a lot of people were asking about how coronavirus has impacted sustainability because a lot of, I guess, typical usage of energy has gone down a little bit because
Hmm.
a lot of places are in lockdown.
Yeah.
But there's also a lot of like research coming out that, you know, people are not disposing like masks and gloves properly. And so if like we continue, I guess, in this situation, it might become more of a problem.
Yes.
So could you talk to us a little more about like how the virus has impacted global sustainability, and if it, do you think its impact, even if we reopen everything and it goes away, will still be subdued because of the fact that there was a virus, or no?
Um, yeah, a couple things. So I think first and foremost, what the virus has done is really put a lot of stress and pressure on public budgets. Um, because in many spaces, in many cases, when you have to lock down people, you have to lock down the economy. People aren't able to work. Some people aren't able to work. Some people you need to work. They're essential. Food service workers, et cetera, utility workers, et cetera, that keep the lights on. Health workers still need to work, and so in both cases, you have to massively increase social spending investments to support the workers who have to work, to keep the rest of us alive and fed and warm or cool in the heat. But also support those folks who are staying in, to try to keep the virus from spreading. And so, many countries, many cities, many state budgets are being stressed. Many countries didn't have that budget to begin with, and so they're really in trouble. And so that then creates a friction, between once you open up, can you, or should you just reopen, or can you somehow, the term that everyone is using, build back better? And so how can you, reopen and use the stimulus dollars that governments are going to be spending to help their economies to reopen? How can you use that to channel it to get the greatest climate benefit? And so there's a lot of discussion about that happening, but particularly in the U.S., because we have basically half of our country still doesn't believe climate change is real, and so half of our political Congress is still fighting against any resources that come from the federal government to support climate goals. So it's going to be very difficult for us to be able to do that. But then the other thing, the more important piece for us to think about in the context of sustainable development and climate change related to COVID. And it's funny you mentioned it because I actually just published a blog about this about a week or so ago, is what the COVID pandemic has shown us is, in a very short period of time, we have had to ask or force people, to walk away, to not go to work, to stay at home. And like I said, some people, have to work. But for many people, in both cases, we've had to increase, like I said, social spending to support, those people, either those folks who are working or those folks who are choosing or able to stay at home. Climate change is going to be very similar because under climate change, we're going to have to ask a lot of people to walk away from livelihoods, walk away from livelihoods that pollute the planet, walk away from livelihoods that that contribute more to greenhouse gases, and we're asking them to walk away into what? We're asking them to go back onto the open market for jobs and for livelihood. We're asking entire cities and entire regions to expose their economy to the open market when they've had a stable flow. I'm from Louisiana. We're an oil and gas, country. I mean, state. And so, the oil and gas just flows. And so you're asking us to turn off the oil and gas and do what? And so if we don't have the social supports to help people in that transition, then it's not going to be possible. And it's the same lesson that we're taking out of COVID. If we're not supporting people, either those who are working to be able to work safely, and those who are staying home to be able to stay home and to be able to meet their needs, then we're not going to be able to solve this crisis. And so whether it's COVID or climate change.
Definitely. And so, okay, so since we now have about 15 minutes left, I'm going to open up the floor to everyone else's questions. So if you guys have any questions, please feel free to type them into the Q&A box, and our team members will be answering them instead of me, because I think I've talked enough. Iman, if you could turn on your camera, and there's a question that's open right now by Avanti. Could you answer that, please?
Yeah, hi. I'm Humanik. I'm a senior in high school in Saudi Arabia. So the question that someone asked was that, do you mainly work in policy issues? And are the majority, you already answered this, but they also asked if the majority of the staff lawyers and other people study policy as well.
Yes, I primarily work in policy issues. So, so I work most closely to federal policy, although, you know, many of my colleagues work also at state and local level as well. And I would say, no, the majority are not lawyers. You know, we actually have, you know, a lot of environmental policy specialists, public policy specialists, you know, community planners, health scientists. And so, you know, public health specialists. And so we actually come from a lot of diverse fields. Although, the lawyers are often treated better.
Thank you. I think Asya has the next
Yeah.
question.
All right, Asya, do you want to answer Prashanti's question? Maybe she might be having.
I can do it.
No worries. Ivan, do you want to ask the next question?
Yeah, sure. So the next question asks, how can we encourage sustainability in developing countries that depend mainly on unsustainable energy and may not be able to prioritize these changes due to other problems that could range from overpopulation, political upheaval, and poverty, etc.?
Yep. Yeah, I think it's, you know, like I said, I think it's the same whether you're talking about a quote unquote developing country or, you know, a high income country like the US. Because I think in both cases, we're both very dependent on fossil fuel energy. And again, if you look at, you know, my state, Louisiana, we are very, very much dependent on oil and gas for our state revenue. My entire family works in oil and gas. And so, you know, when I go home for holiday, we have very interesting conversation. And I think in both cases, you know, we have to acknowledge, you know, the fact that, you know, we are asking these people to walk away from these livelihoods. And so we have to be certain about, you know, what the alternative is going to be for them, and we have to support them in making that transition. You know, we have to also, you know, come to the fact that there are many people who aren't going to be able to find new jobs, and so we're essentially going to have to pay a lot of people not to work. You know, because there just won't be, you know, the viable livelihood options, you know, for them. I think we also, and I saw that in the question, there was a term overpopulation. I would, and others may have a different view, but I would like to suspend belief in overpopulation. You know, the problem isn't overpopulation. The problem isn't you know, the Western world, you know, the white world going to brown and black, you know, nations and communities across the world and telling them that you're having too many children. When, you know, the US consumes, you know, multiple times more than the average person in any other part of the planet. So it's not how many people you have, it's what type of people you have. So you can have a planet with a lot more people, but you can't have a planet with a lot more people if they all consume the way we do in the US. And so it's not how many people, it's what type of people you want to be. And that also links back to a reproductive justice issue, because reproductive justice is really about not only having the right to have children or not have children, but what kind of children, you know, you want to raise, what type of life you want to be able to give to them. So I think that, you know, is going to be the most important thing.
Okay, Okay, perfect. Iman, you can go ahead and ask the next questions. Asa's having some technical difficulties. So,
the next question says, how effective do you think the SDGs are set by the UN in combating climate change? And what are some of the things they're doing wrong or can do better?
Sure. That's a tough question. Because first and foremost, again, like I said, much in the US, we have ignored the Sustainable Development Goals. So we're not a part of that conversation at all. I think it's also important to understand two things. One, the meaning of development. So even when the UN, and if you assume the UN and the SDGs as their best version of themselves, like what could they be the very best version of the SDGs? It's always going to be contested. There are always going to be contested and competing forces trying to define and trying to shape what that is. And so you have to continue to fight. You have to continue that discourse. You have to continue to push the SDGs and development, to be, its best version of itself, its most equitable and most just version of itself, because there are many forces who would like to corrupt it, who would like to make it into something else. That being said, I think, and the second thing I'll say is we cannot forget the journey that this discourse has taken to create, this concept of sustainable development and why it exists. And I think too often, particularly in climate change, and I really like the way the question was phrased, because it's talking about how sustainable development contributes to achieving climate action. In most of the reports, most of the language that we hear, it's usually flipped the other way around. And it's saying sustainable development is a co-benefit or an outcome of successful climate action. And I think that's wrong, because too often we've forgotten that the crisis of climate change is due to unsustainable development, is due to unjust development. And so that needs to be corrected. And too often, we've tried to depoliticize climate change and make it about technology, to make it about science, so that we don't get into issues about politics and economics and ownership over the economy, which are development questions. And so I think it's very important to recenter it and to see climate change and successful climate action as an outcome of sustainable development. Sorry. I'll try to go quicker from here.
No worries. We have so many questions, guys, so we're going to have to choose them accordingly based on topics we haven't covered yet. So, Iman, there's a Green New Deal question from somebody, so I think let's answer that right now.
Yeah. So that question asks, do you think the Green New Deal would enable communities to effectively make this transition, or would a more effective solution need to be created?
Yeah, again, I think if you take and imagine, the best version of what the Green New Deal is supposed to be, then yes. But anytime you have that policy, any policy like that, again, it's going to be contested. It's going to be contested both at the level of the discourse, but also in the level of implementation. Because we've seen that in a host of areas, that even when we have a progressive policy passed, particularly in the US, where we have a very decentralized governance. So, the federal government does one thing, it passes a law, then it goes down to the states and to local governments to implement it. If a local governor or a local mayor doesn't believe in the policy, then it's not going to be implemented correctly. And so there's always a fight, and these things are always going to be contested. But I think what's important about the Green New Deal as a concept, and this is particularly for the environmental community in the US, because we aren't used to thinking of it this way, is the Green New Deal and the Sustainable Development Goals. They both try to integrate our priorities on the built environment and sort of remaking the infrastructure around sustainability and the technology around sustainability. They try to integrate that with the social infrastructure, so the social outcomes, gender equity, racial equity, health, education, justice, democracy. And so all those things are all intertwined into how you actually get to a more just, sustainable society. And that's important. And even today, like, you know, we don't really, again, in the US, we don't really grasp the need for that integration. A lot of what we do is on the built environment and the infrastructure side, and we haven't placed a great deal of focus on the social side.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So our next question is probably going to be our last one. And we're really sorry if we couldn't get to your question today. Iman, can you ask the question? I think it's from someone named Maryam about, I think this one hits close to home because it's talking about Saudi.
Okay, so they asked, in Saudi Arabia, the country has been built off its natural resource oil. How do organizations such as yours aim to persuade or advise such countries to move away from this in the long term?
Sure. Yeah, I think, you know, we aren't working specifically with Saudi Arabia, and I know that many of the Gulf state nations, you know, have been making extensive, you know, investments in wind and solar energy, and are beginning to, you know, to see, and I wouldn't say beginning, I think that they have seen, you know, that there is a light at the end of the tunnel, and the light is solar, and that there will be a peak to the oil age, and so they are beginning to make those investments to be able to transition themselves from it. I think for them, they would like to extend the oil age for as long as possible, and that's going to come into conflict with the science of climate change. And so again, you know, it's going to take, and I really don't know how you do that. You know, how do you tell someone who is massively wealthy from this thing to say, oh, you need to give that thing that gives you so much wealth, so much power, you need to give it up and do something else? How do you convince someone to do that? And so, you know, that is, it's going to take a movement, a public mobilization across all of our societies, to understand that we are in this together, you know, and that, you know, the value of us moving together is much greater than the wealth that we create individually for ourselves. You know, and that's going to be very hard to do. You know, in my country, we can't even get people to wear masks. So, you know, I can't criticize someone for not wanting to be wealthy off of oil. I can't. So yeah, that is going to be a very difficult movement to happen. But that's hopefully why, you know, you all, that's going to be that's going to be your moment. You know, to be able to walk away from that, to imagine something different, and to be able to build the trust between nations. You know, because even now, you know, my country is in a conflict, you know, with China over what? Who knows? Who knows? Who knows and why? And so, you know, we should just be able to walk away from that at some point.
Definitely. Okay, guys, thank you so much. Just to spice it up a little bit, I'm going to launch a poll because I want to see where you guys are from, because I know we have a super diverse audience. So I'm just going to launch this and you guys go ahead and answer it. And then in 1 minute, I'll end it so we can see where everyone's tuning in from. Awesome. Okay, while I'm talking, I'll go ahead and give our conclusion. Thank you so much, Mr. Shahyd, for your time and for your insight. I think everyone had such amazing questions, and this was one of our most popular sessions, just because I think global sustainability is such a big thing, and it's something that definitely, like, especially as a youth, we really want to get involved in. So we're really thankful for your time and effort to take some time to explain to us things that you're probably doing every day. But yeah, that's pretty much it. Mr. Shahyd, if kids or students have any questions or want to get involved, I guess, with NRDC or ask any questions that they couldn't ask in this session, is there some place where they can ask these questions?
Yes, I will put my email in the chat.
Awesome. That'd be really helpful.
And you can reach out to me directly with anything.
Awesome. And I will share the results with you guys. So we have a lot of people from the Middle East. We have a few people from Europe, South America, Southeast Asia, East Asia, South Asia, and US, Canada. So pretty good demographics. So we got a lot of diversity in there. So I'm excited. All right, so the email is there. So you guys, you can just copy and paste it. And then when I send the aftermath email, which might end up in your promotions email inbox, so make sure to check that out. It will make sure to also have the email there. Oh, okay. Let me, Mr. Shea, I think you send it to only the panelists. I'll send it to everybody.
Oh, sorry.
No worries.
I'll do it again.
I just sent it. You're good.
Okay.
Awesome. All right, guys. Thank you so, so much. It was really nice to have our second session, and I hope to see you guys next week. We're doing menstrual health and inequities in developing regions and across the world with Dr. Marnie Sommer of Columbia University. Wow. So we'll make sure to look forward to that and try to come if you can. But anyways, that's pretty much it. Thank you so much, guys, and stay safe.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Bye.